films, stories, but specifically films. Oh, then to include Catholicism into the mix, introduce Pope Pius XII with his letter to the representatives of the cinematograph industry, also known as the ideal film, where he recommends various courses of actions in order to maintain Catholic moral teaching. I will then use this system and apply it to the movie in question, Die Hard. Now, as I said, Aristotle not only breaks down what makes a story, but asks, why is it so attractive to human beings? Why do humans love storytelling? Why do they like poesis, as it is in Greek? He says in chapter 1 of Poetics, now epic poetry, and the poesis of tragedy, and further comedy, and the art of making dithyrambics, and most of the art of the flute and of the cithara, are all in general imitations. All make the imitation in rhythm and speech and harmony. So, essentially, humans want to see themselves. This is an imitation of human nature, right? A story contains that imitation of human nature in a harmonious manner, a well-ordered imitation of human nature from a beginning to an end. So those are essentially what Aristotle claims to be the reasons storytelling is so popular among the human race. Now, in chapter 6, he then goes on to name the different parts that make up a story and goes into their importance. He lists this in hierarchical order. It is necessary for there to be 6 parts of all tragedy, according to which tragedy is of a certain sort. These are story, characters, talk, plot, opsis, and song-making. So let's dive into this a little bit, and let's relate this to Aristotle and how we might be able to interpret it for film. So first, we have story, the plot. This is the movement of the characters through their actions. This goes across universally for us in movies, but also for Aristotle in his plays, or performative arts, such as poetry recitation. We then come to the characters, an essential element of that plot. The characters, for Aristotle, are a little different from how we understand characters, to be fully developed personalities. Taking them for are figures, or avatars, if you will, of simply to do things and to say things. Strictly so. Then we come to talk. Characters do say things. Sufficient dialogue is necessary for a good story with characters. And this is also across the board. Then we come to thought. Now, for Aristotle, and for stage performances or poetry recitation and dialogue of various different characters, you will often have an aside to the audience where the other characters do not hear this character. But also, we could take it as the mannerism, the attitude that the character acts as the character is. This can often be shown in films as a show not tell rule. Right? You get to know the characters and their development by how they act, their attitude, their mannerisms, their actions in general. Then we come to opsis. Opsis remains untranslated in my translation on Poetics, but essentially what it refers to is the visual aesthetic. See, that was an abbreviation. The visual aesthetic of the performance. This could be, for Aristotle, the staging, the choreography, some special effects maybe, but for us, it could include all of that as well as cinematography, camera angles, lighting, special effects, CGI, all of that stuff, the visual approach and aesthetic of the film, of the story in general, of the performative art. Now we come to song making. Some of you might be a little confused because, except for some movie musicals, La La Land, The Greatest Showman, Singing in the Rain, you don't get much song making in a lot of movies. So how can we interpret this? Well, it is paired right up with opsis, which we already know is the visual aesthetic. So we could simply interpret it for us as the audio aesthetic. By the way, Aristotle is probably thinking of the chorus in most Greek tragedies or comedies. Again, we don't have that. So for the audio aesthetic in the cinema, this could be your film score. This could be your sound ethicist, but he never made any moral application to any of these. what do we do with that? Well, what I did with it, anyway, is I condensed what he had to say here. A little easier to remember. 3 is a little easier to remember than 6. First, I took his plot, because we can judge the moral character of a given plot. It's also known as the moral of the story. We can see a hero's journey as a very basic example of this. The hero leaves something familiar, goes into the unfamiliar, overcomes adversity or of some sort, and then returns to the familiar. This is the first moral playing field we have. Then we have characters. Characters, they will have a certain way of being, right? A certain way of acting, a certain portrayal that the film will have. Now, this is slightly different from Aristotle's characters, which are strictly figures and pure mere agents. These are developed, these include what they say and how they act, as well as what they do. But we'll get into actions in just a second. 1. Okay, actions. We have actions here. And this is often the first place of moral judgment for a lot of people, right? There's this sex scene, there's violence in it. There is maybe language involved, right? These are simply the individual things themselves taken out of these characters, taken out of context of the story, right? Really, for the film, these actions are meant to develop these characters. These characters are meant to move the plot forward, right? There is a hierarchy here. I'll just illustrate a little bit. Where the highest thing we have is the plot, the moral of the story. If that's not good, why bother? Then we have, maybe it's a good moral, maybe we have characters who people want to be, but not to be. This could be maybe a character with a terrible attitude and treats everyone like trash. This could be your Mary Sue. This could be, there are a bunch of different examples that you could take. Then you have the individual actions. Again, this is meant to develop the characters, but some actions we might see in films are completely unnecessary. A note about this system here. When I talk to people about the morality of films, or maybe of certain given films, the first thing they tend to go to is simply one of these, right? What they tend to not do is put any of these in context with the rest of it. Allow me to explain by analogy what I'm saying here. If I'm Gordon Ramsay, and I'm judging food, I am going to eat the whole of the food, at least all of the different ingredients and flavor profiles and all of that. I'm going to consume all of that. I'm going to taste and feel all of that. I'm not going to remove an ingredient and say I do not like that ingredient and judge the film by that. No, what a film is food. They're very similar, right? Similarly, as I just said, film is like food. It has ingredients, but you ought to take the whole of it before you start parsing out what ingredients are actually necessary, which ones overpower other ingredients. So that is essentially what I'm saying. When we need to take the whole film, we need to receive that, and then we need to react respectively to it. We need to react only once we've received the whole, and we don't focus on one or the other aspect. All right. So then we come to Catholicism. Specifically, how does that work? How does that come into it? So we then go to Pope Pius XII for this. What he does first is he explains the power of film. He's talking to filmmakers initially, but we can use what he says as viewers and judge films accordingly. So on the power of films, to understand thoroughly the power of films and to make a more exact evaluation of the cinema, it is necessary to take note of the important part played in it by the laws of psychology, either insofar as they explain how the film influences the mind, or insofar as they are deliberately applied to produce a stronger impression on the spectators. Film is a powerful tool because, as we said, it uses both a visual and an audio aesthetic. So it's an art which combines two different senses. And thus, it has a powerful effect on the psyche. So we ought to be careful. Filmmakers ought to be careful as to what they put into films, is what he's saying. But we can also receive that as we ought to be careful as to what we receive from films. I think we can all agree on that aspect. So I like this guy because he lists his things in threes, just like me. So the first thing he approaches is the dignity of man. That which strengthens and uplifts man in the consciousness of his dignity. That which increases his knowledge and love of the lofty natural position conferred on him by his Creator. That which tells him it is possible for him to increase the gifts of energy and virtue he disposes of within himself. That which strengthens his conviction that he can overcome obstacles and avoid erroneous solutions, that he can rise after every fall and return to the right path, that he can, in short, go from good to better through the use of his freedom and his faculties. Man has an inherent dignity from his freedom, from his faculties, from his rationality. He is, of course, the highest of God's creatures on earth, and that ought to be respected as such. It ought to be seen as such. That is what he wants the filmmakers to understand in trying to be artistically flexible, as well as adhering to Catholic moral teaching. But then, when we talk about the dignity of man, we can't help but talk about his human nature. We can't help but talk about fallen human nature, evil. What do we do with it? Well, he speaks of evil in this way. It is one thing to know evil and to seek from philosophy and religion its explanation and cure. Quite another to make it an object of spectacle and amusement. Does this mean there's no moral gray area? Does this mean evil can't be seen in film? No, he goes on to explain further that evil is something that helps us recognize good. Evil ought to be portrayed as evil, because if it is confused for good, we will not know the difference. We cannot perceive the difference between good and evil. Good ought to be good. Good must be shown as good, and evil must be shown as evil. Again, this still leaves room for moral gray area and moral questions that a film can try to answer or give a response to. But it ought not to say this good thing or this good character, this good action is bad. Or vice versa, this evil thing is good. It cannot say that. It ought not to. Otherwise, it is going against truth. Then we come to the third and final aspect, an item that he wants filmmakers to take care of. The community. And he lists, again, 3 communities. First one is the family. It is therefore a lofty and delicate task to restore to men an esteem for and trust in the family. Kind of similar to how we relate evil as evil and good as good. A family ought to be respected as a good. A dysfunctional family must be shown as such. It is not a good to be desired. Then we come to the second community, the state. The state is of natural origin, no less than the family. This means that in its essence, it is an institution willed and given by the Creator. Men, therefore, are obliged to acknowledge, accept, and respect the state, its authority, its right to direct the common good as its proper end. The film producer can give important help in this matter, too, to block divisive tendencies, to remind men of whatever good has been neglected, lead them to esteem correctly what has been falsely valued. Thus, the cinema, without renouncing its own characteristics or suffering any loss, can fulfill its role to the community's advantage, strengthen the sense of loyalty to the state, and promote its progress. The state, like the family, is a good that God has given humanity, right? If you were at Michael Dolson's oration, you will know that the land has a certain connection to its people, to its culture, and it ought to be respected as such. Then there is the distinction that ought to be made between the state itself, where you live in your culture, and those who run said states, right? History has on occasion shown us that those who run the state might not have the best interests of the people at heart. And when that is seen in film, again, it has to be distinguished from the state itself, the good that the state itself produces. Then, being the Pope, he talks about the church. A basic awareness of her presence, the church, will assure for her that respect and reverence she deserves. If it should happen, as not infrequently occurs, that a film deals with events in which the subject of the church enters with importance, then the film should treat that subject according to truth and knowledge with religious tact, simplicity, and decorum. Similarly, except a little differently, the church, being instituted by Christ, is a good. It leads people, its goal is to lead people to heaven. Then it is instituted by Christ on earth. Again, it will have some fallen members sometimes throughout history do evil, using and misusing, abusing their authoritative position. And this ought to be distinguished from the church herself. Otherwise, the church is not getting the respect and love she deserves as the only way to heaven. So, this is it. This is the system that we came up with Aristotle and with Pope Pius XII. These are the check boxes that we need to look at when we're judging a film. So let's go ahead and do that, shall we? Let's put it to the test. Quote Yippee-ki-yay Oedipus. What is the moral, or what is the plot, generally speaking, of Die Hard? Well, New York cop goes to LA to visit his wife and family during Christmas time. He meets his wife at the industry where she works. And at that industry corporation, they're having, corporate Christmas party at the time. Enter German terrorists who round up these employees and keep them hostage. They're trying to get money from the corporation, which is one of the lamest terrorist jobs to do. But, they succeed in rounding up all the hostages, all the employees as hostages. Steps the New York cop. So he is, in the right place at the right time. He avoids getting rounded up by these German terrorists. Now he's on a quest for survival. He's on a quest to save the hostages. He's on a quest to contact the police, take down the German terrorists. So spoiler alert, he wins. This is, again, a very simple hero's journey, very basic. So in that sense, with the hero, knowing what is good, knowing what is evil, and fighting for the good, I give that plot, a good check, I think that's pretty good. So we're going to do that. All right, now characters. I'm going to take two examples in particular, because there's a good number of characters in this movie, but two in particular stand out. First, we have John McClane. He is the New York cop. So we know two things about the description. One, he's a cop. That means he knows and he is actually obliged to fight for that good. Fight against whatever that good. Second, he's a New York cop. This means he's seen some pretty bad evil that could harm the good. So he is not afraid, or rather he is prepared to face pretty ugly evil. So he's, strictly speaking, by that analysis, a good character. And we see that throughout the rest of the movie. He is constantly trying to reunite with his wife, for one. That is a huge theme of the movie. Is he's fighting for his wife, fighting for his life, and fighting for the rest of the hostages whom he doesn't even know. We see this effort and we admire this. We admire his strength and his wit to get past and to take down these German terrorists. So that's pretty good. We see a very good character. Then we have Hans Gruber, the notorious German terrorist leader who comes in to take the money from Yukatami Industries. Now, he is clearly merciless. He knows what he's doing. And he's not afraid to do what he needs to get what he wants, namely, kill the CEO in order to get the money. So that is a very obvious bad guy, and he does it well. Alan Rickman does a really good job. So this character, on the spectrum, these characters are as far away as possible, given the context for the film. And for the most part, all the other characters that we get to know throughout will obviously be good or obviously bad. Some are annoying, but still good. So I'm going to go ahead and give that another check. Bing. Okay. The actions. This is where it gets fun. Let's go ahead and write this out common sense media style, if you guys are familiar with that. So what's the first objectionable item in Die Hard that most people who are generally familiar with it can think of? Well, really, that's the violence. Think about it. It's a rollicking action set at Christmas time. There's a lot of violence because what do you get when you put a New York cop versus German terrorists? It's not going to be pretty. But then again, the German terrorists fire the first shot. We know who the bad guys are. They're the ones who make the first two kills. Most especially and notably the CEO of the industry. That being said, John McClane has to fight that violence with more violence, with his skills with the weapon. So all he is doing is fighting in self-defense. He is still using his reason to read the situation. There are times when he has to avoid shooting other figures, even if they're evil. We know they're evil. Sometimes we're not sure if he does, so that's why he is not firing his weapon, right? And he is trying to minimize the situation as much as possible, not shoot unless he needs to. So there's an essential aspect to this violence. But maybe it's gruesome, right? It is kind of a lot. So why is it there? Well, again, we see that it does have a fulfilling arc. It does show John McClane, the good guy, beating the bad guys and reuniting with his wife, being a family man the entire movie. But the violence raises the stakes, raises the tensions. This is, again, a life and death situation. And he is going insane with how much danger is around him. And he has to keep his wits about him. So I think this violence, given everything, German terrorists, New York cop situation, is kind of understandable. I'm gonna give it the okay, right? Now, those of you who are familiar with military films, what tends to follow from violence? Well, a lot of language. So, you said, what follows from violence? Well, language. That's because a lot of these characters, military in some styles, are exuding their frustration. They are trying to keep their wits about them. And honestly, these words, when used in frustration to the situation, to a very violent and deadly situation, again, is somewhat understandable. What about the quality of words he uses? There are about 29 F-bombs dropped in this movie. In varieties. So can we excuse, say, John McClane's use of it? Again, let's consider the circumstances. life and death situations, as well as New York cop not known for their Tea Party language, for his Tea Party language. So, again, it is drawn from an understandable effect of the cop meeting the German terrorists. So, we'll accept it because it works in the violence, and it does not actually demean human nature from its use. It is strictly out of frustration, meaningless. Let's go ahead and check that. It falls with the violent situation. Then we come to a weird instance where drugs are used. One character snorts cocaine 3 times. It is slightly unnoticeable, but we know what he's doing. We also know that this character is detestable. He's disgusting. He's hitting on John McClane's wife. We're already rooting for John McClane. Why would we like this guy? He also exposes John McClane to the German terrorists when he is trying to hide so as to hide his identity and his whereabouts so as to keep his wife safe. This guy, again, is detestable. And every time he is detestable, it is right after taking drugs. It is right after snorting cocaine. This drug use is not put in a good light. It is in fact put in a dislikable light. So, you know what? Evil is evil here. Check. Then we come to the fun part. So there is a young couple at this Christmas party who are trying to look for some privacy, in an attempt to get busy. And fully clothed, they run in on John McClane and his wife having a discussion. Then we see them again, and they clearly got a lot closer to their goal. Now, the situation is, of course, the German terrorists are rounding up the hostages. They didn't see this coming at a corporate Christmas party, so the woman's breast is exposed for about 2 seconds. What do we do about that? Why is that there? One could argue it is, in contrast to John McClane's fidelity with his wife. Hell with it. That's a weak sauce argument. This doesn't need to be there, right? But it's not like we're defending it, but it also is completely insignificant to the plot. It doesn't need to be there. We are not blaming the filmmakers per se, but we can't really say it's going to ruin the film. 2 seconds. Is that going to ruin the film? If that's going to ruin the film for you, yeah, maybe you shouldn't watch it because you're not watching it for the right reasons. This doesn't need to happen. You can shrug it off. I can shrug it off. Most people tend to shrug that moment off because it's so brief and insignificant, does not develop any characters whatsoever. Then we get to another interesting part. There's a poster in the industrial end of the building. Of course, the industrial workers are probably looking at that. John McClane passes it in running away from German terrorists. Being a guy, there's this automatic urge to want to look at it, right? But this moment comes and goes again in a couple of seconds. But I think it further develops his character. Primarily because he sees it, then his, of course, animalistic urge is to want to look at it. But considering his circumstances, he really ought not to be, and he knows that. So he notices it and moves on. Again, much better, more direct contrast and understanding of his relationship to his wife. We see throughout, by the way, that he is wearing his wedding ring. The very first shot of the film is a shot of his hand with his wedding ring on. He is not going to give in to sexual desire of any kind. He, in fact, covers the poster and moves on with his mission. So I think that is particularly admirable. This, not so much, doesn't really need to be there, but this is good. So, check minus. And because, for the sake of time, I'm going to quickly go through this We can analyze it in the Q&A later if we so choose. But the dignity of man, for the most part, and for the characters that we need to learn to understand, the dignity of man is truly upheld. Even the bad guys are shown to be human in some way. By the way, Hans Gruber is classically educated. Again, when we looked at these characters, evil is clearly evil, or detestable is clearly detestable. We do not want this, and we know and recognize to not want this. So that's said. Good is, again, for the most part, good. There are some technically good characters that are frustrating, and we'll get to that in a second. But, for the most part, I'm going to give that a check. Then we come to the communities. Now, there's really nothing about the church, so we don't have to worry about that. Then we get to the state, it's very, very remote talk and discussion and, commentary on the state itself. Say, for example, we have Germany versus United States. We know who we're rooting for. Reminder, this is not a soccer game, but same deal. But then we also have maybe bureaucratic frustrations with the LAPD. This is for two reasons. It's Los Angeles, and it's the PD. So there's bureaucracy all over the place. But they are still protectors of the good. Even if there are frustrations, they are distinct from that good of the state. So we are going to give that a nice check. Then we get to the family. I think this is, again, the most important aspect of this movie. This is what drives John McClane to excel, to save his family, and to save others, and to take down what is evil for the sake of good. And then, he is reunited with his family. He is reunited with his wife. His wife takes on his last name, by the way, again. So, because, of course, there was this relationship and geographical separation between them. Again, reunited, and the family is seen as a real good throughout this film. I'm going to give that, in fact, a check plus. Let's go. It's a family movie. So let's just average this up, OLP style. All right, check, 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 minus, check, 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 plus, check. On average, I'm going to give Die Hard a solid check. All right. You can share if you want. I'm not done talking. I'm just going to, lead out with this, kind of exit with these few remarks. This is, a system an undergrad college student came up with. But I think it's quite helpful. I think using Aristotle, it analyzes the important parts of the story. It analyzes what we ought to be looking at. And the church, through Pope Pius's letter and recommendations, gives us a better sense, a philosophical sense as to what is good, what is moral, and what the church is really looking for from these stories. Again, it is a tool. You might not like the fact that I used Aristotle instead of Thomas Aquinas. But with this tool, I hope you are able to watch movies in a new light, in a new understanding as to how to judge its moral character. And with this tool, I will leave you with this last quote. Where we go from here is a choice I leave to you. Thank you.
Alvarez, thank you for your energetic oration. I have been holding press conferences with you for a semester now, so I will turn it over to Professor Bowman Hill to ask the questions first.
Joe, it seems to me that the way you analyze, say, the violence, the language, and so forth, is along the lines of, is it realistic or understandable that people in these situations would be acting like this? It's not clear to me that's the criticism people are making when they criticize films for containing those things. It's not as though that people who say that it's unrealistic or something like that. I just mean you shouldn't be deliberately exposing yourself to this, even if it's realistic and understandable. So how do you respond to that kind of critique? So you're kind of missing the point of the critique people make when they say this.
First off, we go back to Aristotle's storytelling is important. Imitation of human nature. Again, we have this hypothetical situation, say for Die Hard, with the violence of facing off against German terrorists, right? So what does New York Cop mean? Well, it is dealing with the rough and dirty harm to the good. It has skills, a cop has skills that he can use to fight what is truly evil, and he knows when and how to use those skills competently, right? So first off, with John McClane, it is in self-defense, right? And it's only absolutely necessary. He tries to tell a German terrorist to drop his gun before he fires. But then he is forced to use a good amount of violence, right? A good amount of force against this merciless, notorious force of the German terrorists. So that's that. Part of it. Then we get to, so it's an imitation. It's an imitation of evil clashing with defense, I would say. And not necessarily that it ought to be realistic, right? Not that it is realistic, but that it is true to how fallen human nature clashes with itself. So that's my initial and primary response to that.
I got one question.
Absolutely.
I was going to determine the bounds in this situation.
So where
So
does
what's the sketchiest film a person could watch? That's imperfect.
Oh God, that's gotcha. Wait, I plead the fifth, by the way. No. So if I understand your question correctly, it's the common question of where does one draw the line, right? And I would say that one draw the line when it no longer touches taste or purpose or effective purpose, meaningful purpose. What do I mean by that? This is where some subjectivity becomes involved. With taste, people will be able to handle certain aspects of objectionable content, right? Like some people can handle military violence, others can't, right? There is that aspect of liking it or no, or being able to handle it, let's say. Then we get to the aspect of liking that element, because that's a detail people often forget and have a hard time distinguishing between being able to handle something and for a higher purpose and actually watching it for the sake of that thing, right? For violence, again, one of the filmmakers said that the violence in Die Hard is because they really want to raise the tensions. And the emotional roller coaster is there with that violence. And you feel the true and absolute relief and love when he is reunited with his wife at the end, correct? Where does one draw the line? We talked about taste. What is the reason for this violence? Again, raises the tensions, it raises the stakes, and it makes the end so much more appreciable. It makes everything feel right at the end. The good is seen as good, especially in contrast with evil. Andy Calloway was saying earlier today that there is redemption even in human nature, redeemed human nature, along with human nature. And so, for the sake of a sort of redemption, one might be able to apply this objectionable material, so-called objectionable material, and create an effective story by that. So again, if it no longer approaches taste of general audience members, and if it no longer has a purpose, an effective purpose, and meaningful purpose, then that's where you.
Thank you. Can I jump in on the violence question? Sorry, Dr. Bell. The quote number 5 says from the Pope, "You can't make evil the object of spectacle and amusement." What if a person were to challenge your interpretation of Die Hard by saying, "Look, Remember the scene where Hans Gruber says, "She's convinced it. She's convinced it. Shoot the glass. Shoot the glass." You know, like, is to make it so John McClane has to walk across barefoot, right? So she's in them shoes. How about the scene when, John McClane kills the terrorist, dresses him up as Santa, and writes on him, "Now I have a machine gun, ho ho ho."
It's an amusing scene, isn't it?
It is. Amusing scene, yes, exactly. So it puts him in the elevator and reveals him to the terrorists and all of the hostages as well. Then my question to you is, how are those two scenes not exactly what the Pope objects to here? You just made violence a spectacle and an amusement. We're all excited because what's McClane gonna do? Like with this broken glass scenario, this is gonna be crazy, man. And isn't it funny that he made him look like, a shot up version of Santa Claus? What do you do with those particular examples? So are they not objects of spectacle and amusement?
With shooting the glass, this again emphasizes Hans Gruber's evil mercilessness, right? He sees the strategy of making John McClane suffer as much pain as possible. And we feel that pain with John McClane. So that response to that is it further instills our we still hate Hans Gruber. As much as we might admire his smarts, he's clever, he dresses really well, we still hate the guy. And this further instills that despising this guy who would willingly make someone defending the good suffer pain. As for the ho ho ho, now I have a machine gun, ho ho ho. My first response is by analogy, when you're facing off a bear, it's much bigger than you. It is much more powerful than you are. And so, what you want to do when you're facing a bear or some creature that is bigger than you or more powerful than you and could tear you to bits, you want to make yourself bigger. You want to make yourself look and sound bigger, right? And he is facing off against trained German terrorists, and he is one cop armed with a Beretta. That's a kind of handgun. He is trying to beat them and survive. So the only way he can really get on their nerves, really shake them up, is to make himself look bigger than he is. And so that will require a better offense for a good defense.
I got more questions, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Alvarez, for your oration. I'm curious about, I'm also curious about the point number 2 under the insights from Pope Pius XII. Part of your defense of Die Hard, as it seems to me, hinges on your evaluation of the characters as either unambiguously good or unambiguously evil. And you use that to be able to say that the movie, at least in part because of the characterization, checks that box on the list where evil is evil and good is good. I'm wondering whether you think a movie with unambiguously good and evil characters, or at least main characters, is better artistically than one with perhaps morally ambiguous characters, or whose actions are morally ambiguous. And if you don't think that the Die Hard type of movie is necessarily better, then how do you navigate a movie with morally ambiguous characters who commit morally ambiguous actions, maybe have morally ambiguous motives?
So, I just need to make sure I'm understanding your question. You're asking, is it more artistic to display morally ambiguous characters in a given movie?
So first of all, is it better to have a Die Hard type movie with morally unambiguous characters?
Unambiguous characters, okay, so
With definitely good, definitely evil characters. And then if it's not better to do that, how do we evaluate along the lines of Pope Pius's criteria a movie with morally ambiguous characters, motives, actions?
right. Well, first off, I would say it's a lot easier to, in some senses of the word easier, to watch a movie where it's morally unambiguous, right? It is easy to identify the good characters from the bad. And that way, it does promote a sense of, well, shooting a CEO in the head for his money is not a good thing. But, being willing to walk on broken glass for your wife, barefoot, that is a good, of course, given the circumstances, given the right context. Being willing to sacrifice yourself for that is a good. So I would say it is a lot easier and morally appreciated when morality is unambiguous. Is there a way in which this, and then the second question, just refresh me, is in a way, is there a way in which you could still appreciate moral ambiguity?
Or if we're thinking of a movie with really ambiguous characters, actions, motives, how do we then apply what Pope Pius says? Evil is evil, good is good. You automatically have to condemn such a movie or not?
Okay. I would say automatic is never a good word, because it's already morally ambiguous. We can't say anything immediate about it. So when one watches a morally ambiguous film, let's use a controversial example, Silence. It's about priests apostatizing in Japan where Christians are persecuted. And there's a lot of psychological pressure going on there. There's a lot of questions that are asked. It's a lot of moral gray area, especially with the Catholic Church, or at least her representatives. So when it is morally ambiguous, we ought not to say that good isn't shown as good because there are some good things about the priests who want to protect these Japanese Christians. But then there's also they're apostatizing, but they're also under serious mental trauma and pressure and torture, right? So we have to acknowledge what the good is and what the bad is, and understand that there is some, we have to understand the ambiguity. We have to understand why it's ambiguous. And we can, once we understand where the ambiguity is, we can come up with an opinion of that. But because of the taste and, given that there are two goods being looked at here, one is lost, the other is attempted to be gained, one has to also acknowledge others will have a different opinion as to what is the good in this film, what is the better good, given all the circumstances.
Well, being a bit short on time, why don't we turn over to the audience and
JP.
This is sort of going off maybe some of the questions that were asked already. I think what comes to mind for some people when thinking about objectionable content in film is they might think of the phrase, speak of the devil and he will appear. Sort of like, are we simply by portraying these evil things, giving undue attention to evil? Where it's like, especially when you're the more extreme examples in film, is it better to simply not speak of that evil thing rather than portray it authentically?
Better to not have objectionable content and to have it as it really would appear.
Yeah, when you can say, are there instances where, as opposed to portraying evil is evil, just simply not portraying the evil?
So Die Hard with no violence.
Die Hard simply with no violence. Well, for that kind of example, Die Hard with no violence, I would prefer imitation. If it doesn't have, if there's no physical clash between the Germans and a New York cop, something feels a little off, right? And it doesn't give the proper effect that the film is actually attempting to convey. A very good effect, in my opinion, on that. So is there a way in which one could say use what I like to call the rule of obscena? Again, touched upon by Ms. Calloway earlier today. Is it better to have something maybe happen off screen, off stage? It can be. It can be useful. It can be useful for leaving it to the imagination, if you will. Sometimes, and many of you probably experience this, where the imagination is almost more powerful than what you will actually experience. That can have its own dangers. For a couple of reasons. One, you might like the film less because of that use of the rule of obscena. Because your imagination is so tense and freaking out about what could possibly be happening. But then there's also like if you don't see or have some experience of the film as it is given with that objectionable content, how can you be shocked by anything? You won't be able to really feel anything or know, or you won't be able to emote anything from the film to a certain extent. So there's a lot of balance that ought to go in there, and it varies from film to film and its purpose and taste. Sergeant.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, so you laid out some really great points of how to examine a film, but one thing I'm a little confused on is it seems that you have to watch the film and then examine it. If my friends and I are sitting down and trying to decide what movie, how do we use your roadmap with maybe not having seen the film?
Yeah. So here's what I would recommend. Sometimes, okay. Here's what I would recommend. Researching the movie before watching is helpful, right? Knowing first what it's rated and kind of what mood to expect from it. Clearly, an R-rated movie will not be meant for sensitive viewers. That's a first step. Understanding the rating and why that it is rated the way it is rated. Then, if you're still unsure about it, like if you're thinking, oh, it's PG, we could probably allow it. I mean, it's up to you. Then we have the question of, okay, but in what way is something that maybe is not harmful portrayed? What kind of characters are we looking for here? I would turn to, well, first off, there's a rather helpful website, commonsensemedia.com. Where it kind of arranges objectionable material, arranges characteristics of the film, has its own review, etc., and is meant to cater towards, say, parents or people concerned about the content in the film. That's one website I refer to. If you're looking for more strictly what the story is and certain things about this film, on a very general basis, the International Movie Database. There's a lot of online sources. I'm going